Lies, chaos, and illusions. Those three words perfectly describe Russian President Vladimir Putin's catastrophic special military operation in Ukraine. What was meant to be a swift campaign that would allow Putin to lather himself in glory as the man who brought Ukraine back under Russian control has devolved into a 3-year fight that has cost thousands of Russian soldiers their lives. These soldiers are flung into chaos, often poorly trained and ill-prepared, so they can be fed into Putin's meat grinder. They are lied to constantly about what they'll be doing and how the war is going, so Putin can keep control over them. As for the illusions, Putin's carefully crafted state propaganda hides from the Russian people the true nature and brutality of the war he created. But all of the lies and illusions have just been exposed. On September 12, 2024, UATV English published a brief interview with a captured Russian soldier named Evgeny Fyodor. Over the course of 5 minutes, he revealed the lies he, his comrades, and his country people are told about the war by Putin, revealing once and for all that Russia's entire Ukraine campaign is built on a foundation of mistruths. In this video, we're going to analyze Fyodor's interview as we dig into the lies Putin tells. We start with the soldier himself. After sharing his name with the interviewer, Fyodor reveals the role he played in Russia's military. "I'm a senior sergeant. I served in the 810th Marine Brigade Military Unit 1314 in the city of Sevastopol." If that city sounds familiar, it's because Sevastopol is one of the main ports in Crimea, which is the Ukrainian territory that Putin annexed back in 2014. "I signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense of Russia," Fyodor claims, "and was in Sevastopol with the Marine Corps." Later, says the Russian soldier, he was transferred to the Don region before being sent to reinforce the state border in Kursk. "We took positions on August 5th, on the same day that the counter-offense of the Ukrainian troops began in the Kursk region. On the surface, that seems like a logical move for Putin to make. Worried about the prospect of Ukrainian forces crossing the border and invading Russian territory, it appears Putin wanted to reinforce his border defenses with experienced soldiers. Only those soldiers weren't told any of this, and that brings us to the first of several lies Fyodor reveals. Russia acted as though everything was fine in Kursk, even as Ukrainian forces were invading. "We arrived in the Kursk region and were told that the situation near the border was controlled," says Fyodor. "Everything was quiet. There were no hostilities, no fighting, nothing. We took positions in some villages and were told to get ready for winter." In other words, Fyodor's unit was provided with absolutely no information about the real reason why it was being stationed in Kursk. As far as they knew, they would serve as a preventative measure, an extra force that would dissuade Ukraine from even thinking about entering Kursk, and in doing so they would have to do little more than hunker down in a village to see out the winter while facing minimal prospect of any sort of attack. Of course, we now know what really happened. Right as Fyodor and his comrades arrived in Kursk, Ukraine launched its counter-invasion. In a surprise attack, Ukrainian forces overwhelmed the minimal border defenses Putin had erected, driving around 18 miles into the Russian oblast. Over 2 weeks and up to mid-August 2024, Ukraine captured around 450 square miles of territory, including 93 villages and similar settlements. Fyodor would have been in one of those villages, explaining why he is in Ukrainian hands when he gives his interview, and would have seen through Putin's lie about why he was really there mere hours after he arrived in Kursk. "It was as if you were going to a different location," Fyodor says. "We had no information at all about what was going on here. The day we arrived on the 5th was when the offensive began." Having been led to believe he would simply be shacking up in a village for the winter, Fyodor was instead sent on patrol almost as soon as he arrived in Kursk. Approaching a road, mortar and artillery shelling started almost immediately, with Fyodor saying he gained the distinct impression that Ukrainian forces were simply waiting for his patrol to arrive. Fyodor and his comrades were meant to be cannon fodder, existing solely to soak up Ukrainian ammunition. And that is far from a unique approach for Putin. As one Ukrainian soldier who goes by the call sign Goth told the Kyiv Post at the beginning of December, Russia is using the same meat grinder tactic during its push into Donetsk. "We're losing ground to cannon fodder," Goth told the outlet while describing how Russia sends wave after wave of small groups of soldiers to exhaust Ukraine's defenses. It seems Putin intended to do the same to Fyodor's unit. After a certain period of time, maybe half an hour, we heard on the radio that there was fighting going on where we had come from. So we were already encircled almost within an hour as soon as we entered the village, says Fyodor. Putin's lie is exposed. "Come to Kursk and hunker down in a village for the winter. We just won't tell you anything about the Ukrainian attack that we know is incoming, so we can use you to soak up our enemy's ammunition." Fyodor notes that it was impossible for his unit to respond to the Ukrainian attack because it had no idea it was going to face one. He describes armored personnel carriers arriving, with soldiers shooting at him with rifles and large-caliber machine guns. Kursk was far from under control. It was a war zone. "Logically, we were told to withdraw and go back," says Fyodor. But given Putin's lies, that was impossible. The Russian forces were encircled, meaning they would either have to try and push through a direct route taking them through 6 miles of Ukrainian firing, or Fyodor and his comrades would have to go the long way round. They chose the latter option. For 3 days and 3 nights we were coming out of the encirclement, and in the end we still ran into the already prepared positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Fyodor simply had no chance. Putin hadn't given him one because Russia had lied to his entire unit about what was happening in Kursk and the reason Fyodor was being sent there in the first place. Inevitably, the Russian soldier was captured by Ukraine's forces. And it's here where we see Putin's second lie come into play. Russia claims that Ukraine treats its prisoners of war, or POWs, terribly. There have been several reports of Russia mistreating Ukrainian POWs. In August 2023, the BBC reported on testimonies from several POWs who managed to make their way back to Ukraine via prisoner exchanges. Some told of being beaten repeatedly, including being forced to absorb shots to the kidneys and chest, as well as being given electric shocks. Constant threats and intimidation come from the Russian guards, with prisoners being left in states of near starvation. As for medical assistance, practically none exists, claim the Ukrainian prisoners. Some of their numbers were left to die while imprisoned because Russia refused to take care of them. The United Nations, or UN, appeared to confirm these reports in March 2024 with its Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, saying that there has been a sharp rise in reports of Russia torturing and executing its Ukrainian prisoners. What does this have to do with Putin lying to his soldiers? Well, it looks like Russia's leader is projecting what his country does onto Ukraine. When asked if Ukraine has treated him well since his capture, Fyodor says that it has. Nobody beat us up or anything like that. They took us prisoner, let's say, they tied us up, but this is a normal action of any armed forces. Compared to what Putin had told his soldiers, that capture was nothing like what Fyodor had expected. We believed in what we were told about them, that they cut off limbs, fingers and other body parts, torture, but nothing like this happened. There were no physical assaults at all. The only sin was that I was tied up. Another Putin lie exposed. At least mostly. Back in November 2022, the UN conducted 100 interviews, including both Ukrainian and Russian POWs. It reported instances of Russian soldiers being packed into vans naked upon being captured, as well as undergoing welcome beatings at penal colonies. But there was nothing to the extent of what Putin claims happens to Russian POWs. Ukraine also said that it checks all information about the treatment of its prisoners and that it would both investigate violations of its humane treatment laws and take any appropriate action. It seems Ukraine at least wants to treat its prisoners fairly, and in Fyodor's case, beyond tying him up upon capture, that seems like exactly what it's doing now. So why did Putin lie? The simple answer, according to Fyodor, is to make the prospect of surrendering to Ukraine appear worse than dying on the battlefield. They don't want us to surrender, says the captured Marine. That's why everyone gets grenades just in case. One to have with you. I mean, if you're captured, you have to blow yourself up. Putin has made it clear that he won't tolerate anybody who doesn't serve in Russia's military as he wants them to serve. Beyond what appears to be an implied order for soldiers to kill themselves rather than face capture, he's implemented harsh punishments for any Russians who try to avoid his conscription efforts. In August 2023, Russia changed its conscription laws so that those who don't show up to an enlistment office after they get a draft notice are fined 30,000 rubles, which is around $290. Prison faces those who continue to evade the draft. Before Putin signed the new law, a Russian draft dodger could face up to 10 years in prison if they were caught. Now, it may be as many as 15 years, at least according to one Russian named Alex who tells the BBC that he was told he may get up to that number of years in prison if he doesn't sign up. So the reason for Putin's Ukrainian torture lie comes into clearer focus. Russia's leader needs bodies on the battlefield. He needs them so much that he's willing to imprison those who don't answer his conscription calls as a threat to the rest. And once a soldier arrives in Ukraine, they're told horror stories about being captured, so they're more likely to fight to their death, perhaps soaking up more Ukrainian ammo in the process, rather than get captured. From there, the conversation turns back to what's happening in Kursk. The interviewer asks why nothing is being published in the Russian press about the situation, to which Fyodor replies that he can't even explain that. It's unsurprising, Russia's state-controlled media has the agenda of making Putin's special military operation seem like the right call for the entire country. Any reports of just how badly Russia is doing would dampen enthusiasm for the war, which is exactly what Putin wants to avoid. The losses are too big for the whole country since so many conscripts died, says Fyodor, and he's not wrong. Russia has actively refused to publish any clear details about its casualty rate beyond claiming that Ukraine's losses are many times higher than Russia's. That appears to be another Putin lie. On December 8th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that 43,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed in the war, along with 370,000 suffering injury. Russia's numbers are much higher, 198,000 dead and 550,000 wounded. It's obvious why Putin doesn't want to reveal those figures to the average Russian. A war that's claimed almost 200,000 lives and injured over 500,000 more goes against the Kremlin's narrative that Ukraine is suffering many times more losses than Russia. The maths wouldn't make sense. So we get another Putin illusion, the hiding of the true toll the special military operation has taken on his own people. And the lies keep coming. We mentioned that Fyodor touched on how many of those who die on the front lines are conscripts. They were not supposed to be there at all by order of President Putin, says Fyodor. Another lie. Putin says he won't use new conscripts on the front lines, but once those conscripts are drafted into the military, they're being sent to their deaths against Ukraine. Again, cannon fodder. Fyodor believes that Putin doesn't tell the Russian people or his military conscripts about this in order not to spark hatred, anger, or something else. Maybe that's why everything is kept silent. The problem for Putin is that he can't maintain that silence indefinitely. The internet has made sure that silence can't reign, says Fyodor. The internet is working, probably everything is being posted and you can see it all there. People understand what's going on. They can see the real situation, Fyodor says before expressing worry that he will probably be sent to prison for a decade if he ever gets back to Russia. Why? Well, because of yet another lie that Putin propagates. Only this next illusion is the one he creates by proxy. He tries to prevent any soldier in Russia's military from speaking ill about their treatment or the army's strategies. It's clearly written in our contract that during this period you must not speak badly about our armed forces, says Fyodor. Any dissent, public or otherwise, will lead to 5 years of imprisonment, claims the Russian captive. Why does Putin insist on these lies by proxy? This forcing of his soldiers to never speak ill of the conditions in which he places them? Fyodor has an answer for that, calling the Russian state an apparatus of violence. The state and authority do not win from people expressing their opinions. Fyodor believes that allowing Russian soldiers to express their opinions would give rise to dissent, which would in turn lead to sleeper cells forming inside Russia's military. He points to the former Soviet Union, saying one of the reasons it fell was because Russia couldn't control what soldiers were saying about it in its former republics. Dissent would spread, giving root to uprisings and revolutions. Putin wants to avoid that at all costs. So he doesn't allow his soldiers to speak about the Russian army at all. And it appears he attempts to exercise that control even after the soldier's contract ends. In December 2022, a former Russian soldier named Vera Antonova spoke to Mediazona to explain her situation. She'd had a contract with Russia's military, but that contract had expired. For over 2 months, her superiors refused to sign her discharge papers, claiming that there was no presidential decree to end the partial mobilization plan Putin put into force in September 2022. For Antonova, that meant no end was in sight for the 14 years she'd already spent working in the records office of a military unit in Moscow. When her contract ended, she was told she would continue to serve as a volunteer. No paperwork was signed. There was no approval of Antonova's end to continue her career in Russia's military. She was a volunteer because Putin's mobilization meant that she had no choice. So we get direct lies within the proxy lies. Putin forces his soldiers not to speak ill about Russia's army under penalty of imprisonment. And now it looks like he's even lying to his personnel about the length of their contracts and their very status within the military. How can somebody be told that they're a volunteer without their approval? By now we're losing count of the number of lies that Fyodor and people like him have exposed, and there's even more. According to the Russian captive, we're also being lied to about Russia's appetite for Putin's special military operation. Those who were mobilized since 2022, nobody wants to fight, nobody wants to take part in this war. Let's say 90%, says Fyodor. That's a far cry from what you might think if you were reading polling figures coming out of Russia. For instance, October 23, 2024 saw the Kyiv Independent publish a report on a poll conducted by the Levada Center in September. It found that 78% of Russians say they still support Putin's activities as president, which implies they also support his war. However, even those rosy figures for Putin hint at dissent beneath the surface. The same poll said that 83% of people think the government should focus more on domestic, economic and social issues, perhaps a message to Putin that many in Russia believe his war is damaging the country. And only 25% of the country supports the full mobilization of Russia in its war against Ukraine. Bear in mind that these are polls conducted amongst people who are already scared of speaking out about Putin for fear of retaliation. Perhaps we're seeing such support for the Russian president on the surface because claiming you support his activities means you're in less danger than if you say otherwise. Putin's intimidation tactics within his own country allow him to project an image of a united Russia that wants to take Ukraine down. The secondary questions in the Levada poll hint at the likelihood that many Russians are frustrated with Putin, placing their lives and their homes second to his obsession with Ukraine. Or, as Fyodor says, nobody wants to fight, at least not among the mobilized conscripts. They're only in Ukraine because Putin forced them to go under the threat of harsh penalties if they try to avoid their supposed duty. Yet another lie. Russians do not support the war, certainly not as fervently as Putin would like to have people believe. And that brings us to the final illusion that Fyodor exposes. What actually happens to conscripts once they arrive in Ukraine? The Russian captive had already hinted at Putin lying to his conscripts about their duties on the battlefield. Remember that new conscripts aren't supposed to be serving on the front lines, a lie that was exposed when Fyodor saw fresh soldiers fighting in Kursk. As it turns out, Russia's military makes a habit of lying about a soldier's assignments. I was told that if you were a builder, then you will dig trenches. If you're a tanker, you will be on tanks. And if you're an artilleryman, you're a mortarman, and so on. You know what I mean? Asks Fyodor. What he means is that Putin is lying to his soldiers about how he'll use their specialities in Ukraine. Artillerymen aren't always assigned to fire mortars, they're being sent to the front lines. The same goes for the builders, who are only supposed to dig trenches, and the tankers, who should be part of Russia's mechanized units. Some are doing what they thought they were sent to Ukraine to do, sure, but many more are pulled from their specialities and forced into being cannon fodder. That's what happened to Fyodor. They're trying to cover their losses, he says, of Russia's decision to send many of its specifically trained forces to the front lines. Our men think that they will serve in their speciality and will not take part in hostilities, but as you can see, we were on the front line when you captured us. Fyodor was told he would be serving in a Kursk village. He had no idea that this transfer would send him straight into Ukraine's crosshairs. And that encapsulates Putin's constant lying to his own soldiers and the Russian people in general. Russia's leader lies to his troops about what they'll be doing when they arrive in Ukraine. He lies about what's happening in the war, about the supposed torture his soldiers will face if captured. He even lies by proxy when he makes his soldiers sign contracts saying they won't badmouth the Russian military under penalty of multiple years in prison. And he does it all in a desperate effort to maintain control in a war that's spiraling out of his grip. Fyodor is just one of many soldiers who are victims of Putin's lies. How many more Russians will allow themselves to live under their leader's illusory world before they rise up? Let us know what you think the answer to that question may be in the comments, along with telling us what you think about Putin's many lies. And as always, thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out Chinese Soldier Fighting for Russia Exposes Putin's Incompetence, or click this other video instead.